Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we'll be doing a bit more of the XR311 and with any luck finishing the front assembly. Here we go, straight into step 4, possibly the most fiddly steering assembly ever. It looks pretty neat, but I can't see it standing up to a huge amount of abuse. We need a few bits from the E-tree, bulkhead, crank arms, little mounting plates and the drag link. Not too many fixings, just a couple of dome-headed M2s, 2 cheese-headed M2s and 2 M2 nuts. We'll need some spots of grease in the slots the cranks run in, partially for lubrication and partly because it will help hold them in while we assemble the rest around them. With the cranks in place, one of the cheesehead screws goes in through the back of the bulkhead and one of the plates slides on the front with a nut to hold it all together. It'll need some Loctite, but we don't want to get any on the plastic. Do up the screw so it's just snug, which will expose some of the thread. Squeeze a little tiny bit of Loctite on the threads and quickly loosen the screw and retighten it. We should just get enough of the Loctite where we need it. This trick works better with properly liquid thread lock rather than the gel stuff, but it'll be good enough. There's a matching plate on the other end of the bulkhead. It needs all the same treatment, screw, plate and some Loctite. Drag link next. The 2 little pins need a little bit of grease, just a smear. Then they go through the ends of the cranks, tying it all together. The 2 screws are a bit tricky to fit. You need them in very straight so you don't distort the plastic and cause binding. Also, the slots for the screwdriver aren't the deepest, so make sure you don't slip. What we're left with is a neat little steering setup, which seems to be working quite well. Okay, on to step 5. Not many bits here. We need the other front bulkhead and the 2 steering linkages, which are just some wire with looped ends. An interesting workaround to keep the linkage in line with the hubs. If they'd use ball ends, there wouldn't be enough clearance. Neat. We need to thread the linkage through the hubs and the drag link on each side. It's all a very nice fit, just ever so slightly tight. Once it's run back and forth a few times, it's going to work a treat. Next, the pins on one side of the suspension arms need a smear of grease, just a little bit, then get fitted to the bulkhead. It's just a press fit, they should just slide straight in. Last bit, and the other 4 pins need a little bit of grease, and the second bulkhead slides in place. The assembly is a little bit wobbly at this stage as there's nothing to keep it all together. Even so, the geometry looks rather good. I like it. Okay, step 6. We need the aluminium bit that attaches the assembly to the main chassis, the little aluminium bit for the front, which seems to be a load spreader for the nuts, and maybe the front bumper mount. There's the 4 brass tubes, long screws and nylock nuts. The screws will need to be fed through the big aluminium bit and the brass tubes go over the threads. Now it gets offered up to the rear of the front assembly. With some jiggling it will fall into place. Too much jiggling though and it will all fall apart. From the E-tree we need the Servo Saver, which will no doubt introduce huge amounts of slop into the steering, and the 2 E7s which limit the suspension travel. The Servo Saver sits on top of the flange that's now in line with the steering drag link. You could probably get it in through the top, but it's easier to drop it in while you can still slide the aluminium bit out a bit for access. The suspension limiters have a square moulded into their backs. They just press into the square sockets in the suspension arm pins. They need quite a firm push to get them fully seated. Next, the little aluminium bit slides over the front, and the 4 nuts can go on. If you loosely fit all 4, it stops the whole lot falling apart while you do them up. I'd quite like to fit some steel washers under the screw heads and nuts, but the screws aren't quite long enough for the extra thickness. When it's all done up, we've got a very compact front end, mostly complete. Step 7. Steering crank. There's not too many bits here. 2 plastic crank parts, ball end, M4 nut, the M4 screw, a brass tube and an M2 nut. The first job is to fit the ball end to the outer hole. It'll need a bit of Loctite. There's not enough thread to do the little trick to keep the plastic clean, so we'll just have to use a very tiny amount. The Servo Saver will take out most of the shock, so we'll probably get away with it. The brass tube needs a bit of grease, and one of the crank arms slides over the top. Spin it around a bit to spread it all around, same at the other end. Slot the 2 parts together and wipe away the excess grease. Sit the assembly in the Servo Saver and line it up with the hole in the aluminium mounting lug. The M4 screw goes up through the bottom and the M4 nut goes on the top. I found the clearance between the crank and the bulkhead was more than a little tight, so I removed a little bit of material to guarantee nothing's going to bind. And there we go, the front end ready to fit to the chassis. I do rather like it. The design would never pass these days, far too many small parts and a complete lack of self-jigging. The assembly constantly wants to fall apart until all the fixings are in. But it makes a nice change. It's a bit more of a puzzle to put it all together. Anyway, that'll do for this week, so thanks for watching. Like if you liked, and of course if you're not already, don't forget to subscribe. It's free, and if YouTube's in a good mood, you probably won't miss the next video. Bye guys!